Hi, it's Lisa Elvin Steltari here from Have Roots Will Travel. I am so excited to be able to present to you. I think what's going to end up being a three-part series with genealogist Amy Ehrman, where we talk about death records and how to really glean the most information and what paths you can take to be able to really learn more about your ancestor. So, with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our pre recorded Zoom that we did. And I hope you enjoy. Any comments or questions, please feel free to post in the comments below. And that's it for now. Let's get started. Hi, welcome everyone. I am so excited. This is my very first Zoom, kind of invitation, and I chose one of my dearest friends who is also an incredible genealogist. We have been friends for at least, I think, 15 years, and I have seen her in so many different venues. She is extremely well regarded among the genealogical community. She's a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, APG. You can go on there and look at her bio. She is a private investigator. Her website is, not her website, but her email is amy@nosywilma.com. And I turn to her for many and everything because she really always points me in the right direction. Because obviously, as a private investigator, she gets the thing done. And I wanted this to be kind of just a chat between genealogists so you could kind of see what happens when two genealogists kind of, meet up. And we went recently for lunch and it was all about, death certificates and census reports and all kinds of things. So it really is kind of an interesting meetup. But for today's presentation, I wanted to I have seen some of these lectures before, but each time I watch it, I'm like, oh yeah, I have to remember that. So let's get started, Amy, with your subject for today, the paper trail of death.
Yes, I love death records. I'm sure a lot of people can be turned off by them, but death records are great because it gives us a family snapshot of what happened when somebody died. We know a little bit more about the family. We learn a little bit more about the person who died, sometimes the circumstances of their death, and that will give us a better understanding of the family, depending on how somebody died. Um, so I just find them really interesting. I'm sure people are going to think I'm a whack job, but
I like them too. So
it's also great because death certificates put a person at a place at a certain time. So you know that if somebody died in 1899 in Kentucky, that they did not die in 1907 in Texas.
yeah.
So it gives us, and then if we know that a person in the family died at this point, it was probably unlikely that they moved, 3 days after the person died.
When I was first taking genealogical courses and things like that, the professor that I had said to me, "You've got to make them dead if you can."
Yes.
And so in my head, if I haven't found the death certificate or the reason or where they were in my mind, I know obviously 150 years have passed. They're obviously deceased. But the story hasn't ended. And a death certificate is like that final chapter. And so
Exactly.
that's
And it's
why
a
it was
great
so
place to work
amazing.
backwards from.
Yeah, exactly.
You can find out so much between that
Oh,
birth and death.
it's incredible.
Um, so today we're going to talk a little bit about death certificates, which are sometimes referred to as reports of death. We'll go into a little bit of obituaries, and then we'll talk about church records and some legal records, and then some funky miscellaneous records. And next time we're going to be talking about some really unusual records to find, but you got to put up with this on this one first. So the importance of death records. legally, it allows us to probate um, somebody's estate. We have medical insights, and then of course, us genealogists, we need the person to die to get their paperwork. Isn't that terrible? But the more we can do, the more information we find about the death, then we could check the probate, we could check church records. There's so many other different places that we can look for records once we know that they are deceased. You are going to jump in when you need to, right, Lisa? Okay. So let's talk about some of these death registers or reports of death. These are important because they can verify parental information, that link between the child and the parents. Sometimes we misidentify people because we don't have that relationship um, shorn up, and a death certificate will do that. We find out where their residence was, where they died. Um, the funeral homes that are in the area might have a history that has something to do with the people also. Cemeteries, the same thing. There might be a history associated with it, and we can find additional records. So when you know the funeral home and you know the cemetery, once you know that, you could check for other records in the same place. Because logically, if a funeral home is used, more than likely it's been used by the family before or after that point. And the same thing for cemeteries.
What about
Um,
if a funeral home has no longer, is there a record? Is there some place that you can dig?
well, sometimes it depends on the jurisdiction and it depends on the people.
Okay.
A lot of jurisdictions will give their information to the state archives, or they'll give them to a historical society, or you can find them on eBay, and some whack job who loves death records will buy them.
Oh my gosh, Amy, you're amazing.
I only have like 8 or 10 of those.
Okay, well, it's not bad.
They're fabulous. They have so much information.
And what does something like that go for on eBay?
Um, I bought all 8 for about $600.
Oh my God, you really are committed to it.
Well, you know what? Things like this, I think I personally really enjoyed teaching in person. If we were in person, I'd be, allowing people to look at the books, but still just having images and seeing what's available.
Of course.
You can't, it's so much different when you have a item in your hand. And that's part of the reason I bought them, because genealogists need to hold it, feel it, and look at it to understand exactly what that record is. It's one thing just to say, oh, it's just a record from the funeral home, but there are reasons that they kept these books, and there's some, yes, and it actually has these have payment histories. They note family members, who the pallbearers were, so much information. And if somebody was in the military, it's noted.
Wow. So
And the later ones that I bought have the separation, the DD-14 files inside the funeral home records.
oh,
Talk
wow.
about saving time. I mean, that gives you all the information that you need pretty much.
Of course.
So informant information is really important too, because whoever signed as an informant, we're 85% sure that more than likely it's going to be a family member. So even if it's a different last name or something, it might be a clue to finding more family. And it's important to know who that informant is, because we don't know their relationship to the person who died. So they could be giving information that is like third hand. If it's a child, the information is going to be a little bit more correct than if it's a fourth cousin once removed.
You mean the death, if it's
The informant.
child, okay.
Yeah. So, and if the informant could be a child that, hadn't seen his father for 15 years and maybe had forgotten information, we need to know those types of things to verify how correct the information is in that death certificate. Like if a father died and the child listed the grandparents' names, pretty good chance that that's correct. But if a brother gave that information, then we could be a little bit more certain that that information is correct for the parents. Okay. So That's always a very important thing before you take the death certificate for gospel. And then we always have those death certificates that were filled out by the hospital. So they're not going to have a lot of good information. So this is a report of death for the city of Chicago, and this is in 1900. So we have the place of death, we have the burial place and the cemetery. We see that she's 8 years old, 8 months, 13 days. So she was just a little baby. And we can see what she's died of. Now, this isn't giving us the parent information, but we have a residence where she died, and we have a undertaker, a funeral home. So now we have some other places to look. We have a cemetery. We have a telephone directory where we can look up that 764 West 19th Street during this time period to see if what family is living there. And then we have the undertaker, and we can run that undertaker name and see what funeral home he belonged to. And that might give us some records.
Okay.
So even though it doesn't say a lot, there's still a lot of clues for us to go looking for more records.
The place of just the place
Sure,
of, sorry, the place of burial. Does it?
Concordia.
Okay, Concordia. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's the name of a German Lutheran cemetery.
Oh wow. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
It's another
So,
like
yeah,
another
and knowing a little bit about the cemetery. So in 1900, we have a child being buried in a Lutheran German cemetery.
okay.
So that tells us that they were Lutheran and they were German, or at least from some part of Prussia.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
Still great hints, right?
Yeah.
This is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and theirs is a little bit different, the registration of deaths, but we have the same basic information. We have the age, we have color, uh, place of birth for the deceased, and then we have name of wife, date of birth. It has a lot of information here. We have the cemetery, we have the undertaker, we have the physician that took care of the person. And that's kind of interesting too, because if they were in a hospital, we could run that physician's name and see what hospital they were associated with.
Okay.
And it might be a regular everyday hospital. It could be a hospital for a prison. It could be a hospital for people that have mental issues. It could be an almshouse. So that leads us to another set of records that we could check. So when we're looking at a death record, or actually any kind of record, the first thing we should ask ourselves is, what other questions is this document raising? So instead of just treating it as a death certificate, we need to look at it and say, where else is this telling me that I need to look?
Okay.
Or what other information do I need to look for? I think that was one of my biggest mistakes being a beginning genealogist. I would get a death record, I would enter it into my system, and I'd be like, yeah, I got the death record. Well, I never took every single piece of information off that document, and that ended up biting me in the butt numerous times.
Oh yeah.
And when you do look at this information and you do start to question the information, or okay, they're living in Milwaukee, what is their address? What's the neighborhood that they were living in? We can find out what church they were attending. We know that some of these people are German. We have somebody who, this child over on the side died of cholera at age 3. Was there an epidemic going on?
Yeah.
Maybe we need to do a check in the newspaper and see if there was something that was going through Milwaukee at this time. And that can be another clue for us to look at.
One of the things that I did early on was take everything verbatim, like believe that it was like actually true. Okay.
Yes, me too.
And so I would say like, oh, okay, the info, I would never check the info. That's the number one thing I check now. Who's telling me this stuff? I
Right.
gotta know. And sometimes it takes me a while to find out who is this person. And even in my own father's death, I was so distraught that I was in an report. And my brother was asking me, where was dad born? Where was dad born? I gave the wrong city.
When my eldest daughter passed away, they kept on asking me what she did for a living.
Yeah,
And I mean, my husband and I both knew what she did for a living, but we were so
distraught.
distraught. If my mother-in-law hadn't come with us, I don't know what would have been on that death certificate. My mother-in-law answered all the questions. We just sat there.
Numb. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And that's the other thing you have to keep in mind is when you've been through the process of somebody who has died and you're in charge of that information, we know where we were in our mind and we
Yeah.
know that there's
We know.
probably mistakes and we have to give that allowance to everybody
Yes.
that is giving that information.
Even
There's nobody who is, even if they knew somebody was dying, is precisely prepared for somebody drilling questions into them. Um,
I
you
know.
just don't know what you're going to get. They are just hints until
Or
very.
hints. I wish we had the leafy ancestry, as we're looking at these things, but
That
no.
would be perfect.
There we go.
Okay, so and this is another option too. So this is the city of Chicago also, but if you look at the large newspaper, it says official death record, and then we have deaths. These are two different columns in the Chicago Tribune. They're right next to each other.
Okay.
One's an official death record, which means that that information was given out by the city.
Okay.
And we have the deaths underneath, which is more like obituaries. So this is given by the family.
Family. Okay.
And then the top one was issued by the city.
Okay.
So we need to check that. Here in Tucson, we sometimes get a list of deaths that are provided by the state or the county. We always have obituaries, it seems. But the older papers, we really need to double check. These might not be on the same page. They might be a page away from each other.
Okay.
So one of the first things when you're starting to do newspaper research, you should casually just go through one of the newspapers. So go through, if you think somebody died in 1900, just pull up a 1900 paper and familiarize yourself with the Chicago Tribune or whatever paper you're going to check. See how their format is. And then you can decide what you're going to find or what you should be looking for. Without being familiar with the paper, you're going to miss something like that. And it's very important. The other thing in the papers regarding death are people thanking their church, their neighborhood, doing a thank you to a saint, anything like that, which would be more of a personal ad and not in the death record. But there are records of families saying thank you so much to everybody who attended my father's funeral. Well, if he's not listed with a obituary, we now know that in the personals there's a thank you, so he must have died.
He must have done. And also this brings to my mind, certain smaller papers only would list, all the deaths of the preceding week. They would group them together. And so to know that on Monday, that's when the obituaries come out. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I know, like in Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada, there's a certain day that the paper releases the obituaries, or did at some points.
Right.
So
Not
I
so much
knew that.
anymore since it's digital. But yeah, in Chicago, the big papers came out on Sunday with the many, many pages of
Okay.
obituaries.
Okay.
So kind of along the same thing. It's, kind of like, your grocery ads are going to come out on a Wednesday.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a rhythm to the newspaper. That's why it's so important to actually look
Understand it.
through
Yeah,
an edition just to see what there is.
very good.
If we were all just born with the knowledge that we need. This is the other thing. We need to check obituary information in other languages.
Oh my goodness.
So if we know somebody is Polish, this is actually the death registration that we looked at a few slides before. This
Yeah.
is one of them. And this is in a Polish newspaper. And I just wanted to give a little hint. What I do is I blow these up as big as I can. As you can see, this is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And then I number each line. And then I translate each line on the newspaper. And you can see two different pieces of writing. See, I did all the easy stuff. You can see my printing, and the stuff that was more difficult, I made my husband do because it was his family.
Okay.
So,
Does he speak Polish?
well, he has enough Polish in his background that it was much easier for
Okay,
him.
got it.
His family is Croatian and Polish, so
Wow.
you know he grew up with some of this stuff versus me. I could do some German. I could fake it in a little bit of French, but this is not working for me.
This is fabulous. Thank you.
So great hints to going through those. But if you know somebody is specifically um, Polish or German or
Italian?
Italian or
Yeah.
yeah, you
Okay.
need to check to see if there is a local association or a local newspaper for that language. It's very helpful.
Extremely.
Mhm. So this is a copy of a will. And what I wanted to do is kind of show you when we're looking at wills, we have um, William Skibby who passed away, and I blew this part up. It's a little fuzzy, but he says that he wants all of his debts paid, funeral expenses. Then he says, I give to my daughter, adopted daughter, Viola Lundquist, and it says what she's getting. And then it talks about what's going to happen with the leftover money. And it's going to go to William Skibby Jr. and daughter Lorraine Clark and his wife. So first his wife, and then if she's deceased, it will go to William Skibby or Lorraine Skibby. And then it says that his wife, Clara, is going to be his in charge of his estate.
Okay.
So when we're looking through this, let me see what my next slide is. No, okay. So when we're looking through this, we know that Violet was adopted, correct?
Correct.
And we know that William and Lorraine are his daughters. But nowhere in this document does it say that Clara is the parent to William or Lorraine. We can't assume that just because she's the wife that she is also
The mother.
yeah. So we looking at this, we know that we need to find some more information on Clara and William Skibby and Lorraine Skibby. And quite possibly, if we're interested in this relationship for Viola, we need to see if we can find out if she's one of the adopters. So if we find a census record, say Viola had to have been adopted in 1920 or 1924, and we
Okay.
find a 1920 census that says William and Clara were married in 1920, then we can assume if they were together in 1920 that when they adopted Viola, they both adopted the child.
Okay.
It's just an assumption. We don't have any proof that was adoption papers, but it makes sense. But we don't have any information on William or Lorraine unless we find their birth record. All we know for sure is that their father's name is William Skibby.
Would there be any, you know, benefit to, because this dollar that he's giving her, is that something that would tip you off, or is that something like, oh, well,
Um, I can tell you the real story behind this, and it makes sense when you know. And this is a common practice in wills.
okay.
I leave something to someone. I have to leave something to them, or they can dispute the will. If I've
Oh,
left the child totally out, they can dispute the will. William had bought Viola and her husband a home prior to his passing. So she was informed you can get your inheritance now when she
okay.
went to buy the house, or you can get your
That's
inheritance
fascinating.
later. Right.
Excellent. I
So
did not
that is
know
your
that about
that
the
is
dollar. So
yeah, that is your
that's
clue.
okay.
If he left her nothing, she could have sued for 1/3 of the estate.
Okay.
But he left her something, so it was good.
Okay. Perfect.
Let's talk a little bit about church records and death records. So if we look around, we can find churches in the neighborhood. If we can pinpoint where they're living in a census and where that information from the death certificate says they live, and we know that they were Catholic or we know that they were Lutheran or Jewish, we can pull up the map from that time period and see if we can locate a church nearby. And that's where I would start looking for records. Um, there's information should also be in the funeral home records. If we find that, it will more than likely note that there was a pastor or a priest. And by running that name, we can go and find additional church records. Most of the time, especially way back, people didn't just have a death record at a church. Their family belonged to the church. So we have, if we can figure out what church they go to, we can find baptisms, confirmations,
Okay.
marriages. It's a great clue to find where to search for those records. And then, of course, it depends on what religion as to what type of records you're going to find. So this is the sister of that first initial death certificate that we looked at.
Okay.
And she was born on the 6th of April, Hedwig, and she died on the 8th. Got the diphtheria. And then over here is noted the parents, Theodore and Johanna Mietel. So as you see in that record that we had, the 1900 Chicago record, and that was used for like 10 or 15 years, Hedwig's death certificate would not have mentioned her parents. But this record at the church does mention the parents. So after we know, if we know when she died and we can figure out what church she goes to, we can look up the information and get it.
Excellent.
And then again, they're listing the death also. So it's great if we have those two things line up. If we get a death certificate and we have the same, we just want to make sure all the information correlates.
Of course.
All right, this is a copy of a death record. It is from, this is from the recorder's office. And the recorder's office in the state of Arizona registers deeds. Now, are you curious as to why there's a death certificate recorded in the deeds?
Yes.
Well, let me tell you. So this person died and the property was in his or her name, his name and her name. And so to prove to the recorder that the husband is dead, we bring a death certificate and they file it in there. So they can change the name now just to the woman's name.
Got it.
But we have to show a pattern for the recorder's office that, yes, it was owned by these two people, but now we have proof of death. So now it's only owned by one person. So we're filing copies of death certificates in the recorder's office.
Okay.
So when in doubt, check the recorder's office. And I think this was filed in 2021, and I think he died. If I see, oh, he died in 2021. Sometimes, as people are getting near the end of their life and they're trying to take care of their estate, all of a sudden, 40 years later, they'll be like, "Oh, I better get that death certificate filed at the recorder's office so I can get it changed over to just my name instead of both." So you can find death certificates that are 20, 30 years old being filed as recently as yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So another place to check. It's kind of bizarre, but and they're all public records. All the recorder's offices are public records.
And there's no requirement for a relationship, you know how?
No, you can just go to the recorder's website and you can do a name search.
Okay.
Just plug that name in and run it through. They're called different things and held by different offices in different jurisdictions.
Okay.
But you're still going to find the same type of records.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite places to look for people when I know, as a private investigator,
I was about to say.
when I can't find a record of somebody's death, or I find a record but I can't tell if they're really alive or dead, I will go through the recorder's office just to see if something's filed so I can cross it off the list and say, I didn't find a record of death here or here or here.
And it's important that they give that record of death so that the
Right, so they could change the paperwork. They need some type of proof to take somebody, you have to have proof to take somebody's name off a house
okay.
or off a property, I should say.
So we're going to take a break, and this is the end of part one of Amy and Lisa discussing death records. So I'll see you on part two of this series.